Today, you're going to be using your edited Our Town photos to make an old-style vintage postcard. To begin, open up Adobe Photoshop. We're going to need a new file, so you could either go to File and then choose New, or if nothing's currently open, you can click the blue New File button and a pop-up will appear. We're going to work along the right-hand side of that new pop-up. I've zoomed in so you can see that right-hand side a little bit easier. First, we want to set the units to inches. Then we want to type in for the width 6 inches and for the height 4 inches. Then for the resolution, we want it at 300. Make sure the color mode says CMYK color at 16 bits and the background contents should be white. Now up on the top right, title this Vintage Postcard - your last name. Now that your custom size has been created, hit the word Create. And a new file will open that is 6 inches wide by 4 inches tall. Now it's time to save this. So you're going to go up to File, Save As, and you are going to have a pop-up appear. You want to save it on your computer. You're going to save it into your OneDrive, and you should have an Our Town folder already. If you don't, you can make one and call it Our Town. Select that folder and make sure the format says Photoshop and then hit Save. Now it's important that your workspace or Photoshop space looks like my space. So let's go ahead and go up to the word Window, go down to where it says Workspace, and hover over and click on Essentials. Now that you've done that, go back up to the word Window, hover over Workspace, and go down to Reset Essentials. And now your workspace should look exactly like my workspace. Now it's time to add the text. For the font, you're going to have to use Futura Condensed Extra Bold. Please don't choose a different font because we need to mimic what was done on these old-fashioned postcards. If your computer doesn't yet have Futura Condensed Extra Bold, you're going to have to download it by using the font file in Schoology and install that on your computer. We're going to need to use the text tool. So go to the T tool on the toolbar. Cursor will turn into a text tool, and I need you to just click once on the page. The font will be very small and it will not be the correct font right now, but that's okay. What I would like you to do is in all caps write the name of the town you are doing. Next, I'd like you to highlight the word. The easiest way to highlight a word in Photoshop is to find your Layers palette. The Layers panel is on the bottom right-hand side of Photoshop. And double-click on the small T icon. That's going to highlight your word, and then in the Options panel, the Option panel runs along the top of Photoshop. This also changes the look every time you change the tool. Because we're on the Text tool, all the things in the Options panel are options just for text. On that Options panel, I want you to type in Futura, and you're going to have a pop-up appear, and I want you to choose the font Futura Condensed Extra Bold. Now your word will have changed to Futura Condensed Extra Bold. Now change tools. You're going to need the Move tool, which is your topmost tool. Now on your keyboard, press and hold Control and then press T. Now a bounding box will appear around your text. Now hold down the Alt key And as you hold down the Alt key, click and drag the center box, and your word is going to start getting larger. You want it large enough that it fills the page. Now you can let go of Alt and pull the corners to resize it. Once you're happy with it, you can hit Enter. Now I would like you to double click the T on your Layers panel again. Remember, this selects and highlights your word. And what we need to do is reduce the space between the letters. This is called tracking. To make this happen, you're going to hold Alt and use the back arrow on your keyboard. Be careful when you're doing this. You don't want the letters to actually touch. So if they start touching, you're going to hold Alt and use the opposite arrow key. The other thing that you're going to notice is sometimes the letters just don't look evenly spaced. For example, the W and the A in my example have a lot more space than the other letters. So in this case, I would click to set the cursor in between two letters, and then I use the Alt back arrow key. When you want to jump the cursor from between two letters and go to two other letters, just use the arrow key on your keyboard without using the Alt, and that will move your cursor in between letters without you having to click. Once the cursor's there, you can hold Alt and you can use the arrow keys to move those letters either farther apart or closer together. Remember, you don't want any of your letters to touch. So if you see that they're touching each other at any point, stick your cursor in between and use Alt forward arrow, and that's going to increase the letters. Then give it an overall look to make sure the letters look like there's even space between all of them. This process is called kerning. The other process where we moved all the letters at the same time was called tracking. Of course, once you adjust the letters, the word might look a little small, or you might want to move it around. If you want to make the word larger, hit Control T, and then you can make that bounding box and pull it larger. Or you could just go to the move arrow if you just need to move it back into place and place it in the center of your document. Okay, now we are ready to make the word look like it's rising, like the vintage style. So you're going to go to the text tool. Go to your layers panel and highlight that text. Now, you're going to see up in the options bar, there's a little T with an arc below it. Click that. Those are your warp options. Where it says style, next to that, click where it says none and go down to where it says rise. You're going to see it's very dramatic. It starts, I think, always defaulting to +50. If you don't want it quite so dramatic, you could reduce that. The center is none, and as you move it closer to where it defaulted to 50, you're going to see the rise is more dramatic. I'm fine with 50, but you do whatever you think looks good with your particular word based on its size. For my word, I think close to 50 is pretty good. When you're satisfied with that, click OK. Now go over to the Move tool, that's your topmost tool, and you're going to move your word. Now we want this in the perfect center, so I'm going to move mine so it's really awful and not in the center. What you need to do is go to your layers panel, and your word is the layer that we're on, so hold Shift and click the background. Now both the word layer and the background layer are selected. Now if you notice, your option bar changed. So up in the options bar, there's some alignment tools. If you click on the one that is on the left-hand side, there's one that looks like everything is center aligned. So we want to click on Align Horizontal Centers, and that's going to center it from left to right. Now move over a little bit and you're going to see one that is for align vertical centers. Click that and it's going to align it in the perfect center. Now because this is a raised one, what I sometimes like to do is just, I need to deselect, sorry, I had both of them selected. If I just go to my word and I want to move it up a little bit, just because if it visually looked a little bit farther down, I'm going to hold shift and then pull my word up a little bit. But this is just for this Waterford word because I felt like it looked a little bottom heavy. If you had a different town or a different word, it may look just fine. But we just want to visually make sure it looks centered. Now click Ctrl S. That will save your work so far. Now it's time to open Lightroom, and you're going to go to the photos that you have already edited for this project. You're going to select all of them by holding Control and clicking on the ones that have already been edited. Now, with them all selected, you're going to hit Control E. This is going to send them to Photoshop. If it asks you to render with Lightroom, go ahead and render with Lightroom. And you're going to notice that these start exporting and eventually they're all going to go into Photoshop. If your computer is being really slow, you might want to open them one at a time. But in this case, I've opened all of them at once. So you can either do it like you normally do, one at a time, or you can open them all together. Now, once they're open in Photoshop, you're not going to be able to see all of them. And so what you're going to need is your Word that we've worked on, and then you're also going to need to find your files. You'll notice along the top, there are all the different file names. And then at the end of that line, where you can't see the file names anymore, you're going to see a double set of arrows. If you click that double set of arrows, that's going to allow you to see all the files that are currently open. Click on your vintage postcard hyphen your last name, and then your postcard is going to open. Now, I want you to learn to zoom out. If you hold Control and press the minus key, that is going to zoom you way out like this. Be sure to use the Control button that is to the right side of the space bar because that's the one that's closest to the minus sign. Hold your thumb on the Control key and keep tapping the minus key until you're zoomed out as far as I've showed you. Now find one of your photos. Now you're going to need to get used to some keyboard commands because we're going to use them over and over again. The first one is Control A, which means select all. It's also important that you're using the correct side of the keyboard. There's a Control key on both sides. However, use the one that's closer to the letter that I'm asking you to pick second. I've seen a lot of students that had a really hard time with keyboard commands simply because they were just trying to stretch their hand too far. So always look at where the highlighted symbols are on the examples, and that's going to give you a better idea of how to hold your hand. Now on your photo, you have your photo selected. Now hit Control A. That is going to select all. Now you need to copy it, so hit Control C. Now switch to your vintage postcard Photoshop document. Now you are going to paste it into that document by going to Control V. Now it's likely you're only seeing a portion of the photo because our cameras shoot in such high resolution or megapixels. So we need to find the entire document. To start this process, press Control T. And this is going to put a bounding box around your entire photo. When you see that bounding box, you're going to need to either zoom out a little farther, or you could just move it and start dragging one of the corners down. until you have a photo that is the size of your word. When it's the size of your word, you can hit Control-0 to zoom back in, and you want to figure out which area within the word you want this to go inside of. Once you're done resizing and positioning, you can hit Enter. Now, as long as you're on the Move tool, you can still move this around anywhere you like. Now we're ready to make the photo go inside of the word. This is called a clipping mask. So what you need to do is go to the little picture on your layers panel. It should be called Layer 1. Make sure that layer is selected, and then you're going to right click on that layer. And what I mean is not to tap, but to actually click the right button. A really long pop-up list is going to appear. And what you need to look for are the words that say Create Clipping Mask, and then you can click those words. Then your photo is going to go inside of the letters. Before we move forward, I want you to make sure you're on the Move tool, and then up here in the options bar, make sure the little box next to Auto Select is not checked. If it is checked, just click it to uncheck it. Now just a couple other things. After you put your word inside, your picture inside of your word, and you have made sure auto check is off, you can move this around and it's inside your entire word. So you can determine where you want to put it. Now, what if you want to tilt it, or what if you need to make it bigger or smaller? So you can move it around and decide which letter it's going to look great in. And then if you need to hit Control-T again, that will bring up that bounding box. So you can still make it smaller or bigger. And then here's a new thing. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If I hover near the edge of this box, instead of having me being able to just pull it smaller or bigger, I can hover near the edge. I kind of have to go to the corner and pull away. I get a double arrow. And that double arrow will allow me to tilt. So if your word is really extremely tilted, then, you may feel like you want to, tilt your letter. Be very careful that it does fill the entire letter. And then once you're done with the Control-T, that brought up the transform box, you just have to hit Enter. Now, you're going to label your layer. I want this to just be in my letter R. So I'm going to come over to my layers panel, and I have to click in a specific area. Right now, my layer is called Layer 1. If I double click right where the little letter Y is, if I double click that, then I can type in the letter R. And if I click off of that, then it's going to rename it as R. If I click anywhere else, like if I click out here, a pop-up's going to appear and I have to cancel that. So just be careful when you're renaming them. You have to click right on the little layers letters. Now we're going to make it disappear. So with that layer selected, at the bottom of your layers panel, there is a little rectangle with a hole inside of it. I want you to hold the Alt button and press that little symbol, and your picture is going to disappear. But a little black icon is going to appear next to that picture on the layers panel. Now press B because that's going to switch you to the brush tool. Now press D on your keyboard, and that is going to ensure that your colors are set to the default black on top of white. Now press X to bring the white color to the color that we want to paint with, so it goes on top. Now we need to know a few things about using a brush. So when you're on the brush tool, you get a little circle, and if you use the bracket keys. So the brackets are the little buttons next to the letter P on your keyboard. Those brackets will make it bigger or smaller. But if you just see this, a little plus sign, that's called a crosshair, first check to see if caps lock is on. Because if caps lock is on, the numbers on your options bar you can see change, but that icon doesn't change. When I turn caps lock off, I can see a preview of the brush getting bigger or the brush getting smaller. The other thing is, what if it's not a circle? Well, we reset Photoshop to default, but if you went in and started playing around with things, it's possible that the brush changed what it looks like. So if you go up to the options bar and click the down pointing arrow next to a little symbol and it has a number, you're going to see that you have so many endless brushes. I have so many brushes. What you want to find are the general brushes. So general brushes, we just want a round brush. The other thing that all of us need to do is we want to change our brush from being a soft brush to a hard brush. So if we click the down pointing arrow and we go to where it says hardness, we want that up to 100%. When you're done setting it to 100%, click the little down arrow and it will close that drawer. Now if you hover back over here, you're going to be able to use the bracket keys to change the size of your brush. Why is this going to matter? Well, now that we have hidden our picture, we're going to take that brush and set it to the size of a letter that we want, and when we start painting, it's going to paint inside of that letter. Now, if we accidentally went into another letter, it's going to paint that letter. So what do? How do we get that off of there? Well, remember the switch key. If we hit X, look at our colors. Black is now on top. Black matches the little icon that's on the layers panel. So if I paint with black, it's going to erase. When I paint with white, how do I switch it back to white? I hit the X. Now my color on top is white. When I paint white on top of that little box, it's going to let me reveal what's inside of that letter. So we just want to be careful that we're staying inside and painting just that letter. Now it's just repeating that entire process. Go to another picture, hit Control A, then hit Control C. Go back to your postcard, hit Control V, zoom out, hit Control T and resize. Bring it over to your Word, hit Control 0 to zoom in, resize. Decide which letter you want it to go on. When you're done, hit return or enter. If it didn't already go inside your Word, it's easy to get it inside your Word. Go to the layers panel, click on the new layer 1 and drag it below the other letter that you had. You'll notice a little arrow symbol goes beside it, and once that little arrow goes beside it, it is going to insert inside of your letters. If you need to move it, go to the Move tool and move it around. If you need to resize it, set up your transform box so you can go to Control T and get the transform box, and then whenever you're satisfied, hit Enter. Now hold Alt and click the little layer mask icon on the bottom of your layers panel, and then use your white brush to paint it inside the letter. On this demonstration, you're going to notice I'm labeling my letter before I started painting. Now this next part is a huge concern. Notice the little white brackets around layer R2's little picture icon. If the brackets are around that, the eraser thing won't work. So you have to make sure, if your brush isn't ever working, you have to make sure you click on the layer mask. Those little brackets need to be around the layer mask. Otherwise, the white and the black brushes are not going to work. Now repeat that process for all the letters. Copying, pasting, transforming, creating a layer mask, and painting inside the letters. Make sure you're labeling your letters along the way. It makes things a lot easier later.